Well, welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. Well, the battle over the Mueller report is just beginning. Democrats say the findings are rigged. And they're suggesting Attorney General William Barr is partisan. They're demanding the full release of the report by next week. And interesting, on that report, the president is agreeing with them. Our CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson has that story.
Republicans are claiming the high road after the 22-month Mueller investigation found no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia.
It's lasted a long time. We're glad it's over. It's 100% the way it should have been. I wish it could have gone a lot sooner, a lot quicker.
Make no mistake about it, my fellow Americans, this was a total vindication of the President of the United States and our campaign. And it should be welcomed by every American.
Democrats disagree, questioning the Attorney General's conclusions.
The President has not been exonerated by the special counsel, yet the Attorney General has decided not to go further or apparently to share those findings with the public.
Suggesting the findings are rigged and calling for the release of the full report to the American public.
We cannot simply rely on what may be a hasty, partisan interpretation of the facts.
President Trump and other Republican leaders agree the report should be released.
Up to the Attorney General, but it wouldn't bother me at all.
My desire is for the public to get as much of the report as possible.
Senate Judiciary Chairman Lindsey Graham is calling for a special counsel to look into actions by the FBI and Department of Justice during the investigation into the Trump campaign in 2016.
What makes no sense to me is all the abuse by the Department of Justice and the FBI, the unprofessional conduct, the shady behavior. Nobody seems to think that's much important. Well, that's going to change, I hope.
He questions why no one alerted Trump of possible ties between his associates and foreign governments like Russia, as they have for lawmakers like Senator Dianne Feinstein in the past.
That's the way it's supposed to work. How did it fail and break down here? Was it a ruse to get into the Trump campaign? I don't know, but I'm going to try to find out.
Meanwhile, administration officials are calling on the media to apologize.
You owe the country an apology. It gets my goat that we're doing great things in that building behind you and you refuse to cover it because you had to cover collusion, you had to cover conspiracy, you had to cover the Russians, you had to cover treason, you had to cover impeachment, you had to cover indictment, you had to cover nonsense.
Senator Graham warns Democrats they should accept the findings of the Mueller investigation or risk the public backlash Republicans faced in the 90s as they continue to investigate President Bill Clinton. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Well, you know, the media is just apoplectic. They were so totally wrong. They were so absolutely wrong. CNN was just off the wall, and MSNBC off the wall. Some of their comments were outrageous. And you put them all together, the New York Post put them all together in a column. It's just incredible how these people screwed up. But they didn't do that. It was deliberate. They wanted Trump out. They hate Trump because Trump is going after the establishment, the people who've controlled this government and all of their tentacles are feeling the heat because he wants to get rid of them. And there's one thing that he wants to get rid of, and that's called the Affordable Care Act. There's a judge in Texas who has ruled that the individual mandate is unconstitutional. And therefore, if one branch of that law is unconstitutional, the whole thing is, because there was no severability built into it. And the Trump administration has agreed with the judge. They said the Justice Department is not going to appeal it. So that's the way it is. Yeah. Well, what's happening now?
Well, Pat, the Justice Department, as you were just saying Monday, reversed course to support a federal judge's decision declaring the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional. District Court Judge Reed O'Connor's ruling in December also called for the entire health care law to be invalidated. Previously, the DOJ argued that only parts of the law were unconstitutional. This move is expected to solidify health care as a top campaign issue going forward, especially in the area of pre-existing conditions. Well, the Senate is set to vote on the Green New Deal. Introduced by freshman Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the controversial bill lists several expensive proposals, including getting rid of all fossil fuels and upgrading every building in America to make them environmentally friendly. Several Democratic presidential candidates co-sponsored the bill. Critics label it as socialist. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell scheduled the vote to put Democrats on the record for the election season. Democrats who don't want to be tagged as supporting the bill plan to vote present. Well, residents of southern Israel spent the night in bomb shelters as the IDF and Gaza militants exchanged fire. The situation is calm today, but there are fears the fighting will resume. As Chris Mitchell reports from the southern town of Sderot, some believe Hamas is taking advantage of the upcoming Israeli elections.
Israel is responding forcefully to this wanton aggression. I have a simple message to Israel's enemies. We will do whatever we must do to defend our people and defend our states.
Netanyahu canceled his appearance at AIPAC after Hamas launched a rocket at Israel that slammed into a home north of Tel Aviv. Israel has moved 2 brigades to the southern border, including 1 armored brigade, signs it may be ready for a ground incursion. Hamas launched more than 30 rockets into Israel over 2 days. Many were shot down by Israel's Iron Dome. Israel struck dozens of targets inside Gaza, including the home of Ismail Haniyeh, head of Hamas's political bureau. Many residents here in Sderot and southern communities slept in bomb shelters last night. All schools around the Gaza Strip were closed, and employees with non-essential jobs can only go to work if a bomb shelter is close by.
There's nothing more nerve-wracking that at 3 in the morning to hear a siren going off saying Tseva Adom, which means red alert. So you have basically 5 to 10 seconds to take your babies in the middle of the night out of their room and take them to the one room in the house that's a safe room.
What do you do when the alarm goes off?
I'm praying for God that will save us.
Professor Eyal Zizzer said the upsurge in Hamas attacks has to do with the upcoming Israeli elections.
No government will go to war before elections, so they think they have, a window of opportunity till the election to, on the one hand, escalate a little bit, and to gain something in return.
Regardless, many residents here depend on God and prayer from around the world.
We appreciate the prayers of our Christian brothers and sisters. The Iron Dome is not just a physical defense shield. We need your spiritual defense shield also. We really believe that miracles are happening every single day.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Sderot, Israel, the bomb shelter capital of the world.
Thanks, Chris. And Pat, before he left Washington, Prime Minister Netanyahu did promise a forceful response.
Well, nobody wants to go to war before an election. That's not a cool thing. But at the same time, Israel has to defend itself. I think pulling out of Gaza was a terrible mistake. There were many, many Jewish people living there. Gaza could have been pacified. And yet, at the same time, it was Ariel Sharon who pulled them out. And actually, they forced the settlers to leave at gunpoint and leave all of their houses and their land and their gardens and all the rest of it and pull out, turn it over to the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is under the control of Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization dedicated to the destruction of Israel. So that's hardly a partner in peace, and it's hardly a nice neighbor to have next to you. So now Hamas is sending rockets, and one rocket hit just south of Tel Aviv, which is, the major city there in Israel. And to feel that kind of stuff's going on, but what are the Israelis going to do? Is it time to go back in and retake Gaza? Who's going to live there? It's going to be very, very hard to get settlers to go back in there again. And it's going to be like a sore in the side of Israel. So it was a big mistake. They made a terrible mistake. Sharon made a terrible mistake, but he's gone now, and they've got to live with it. Well, there's something else that was amazing. They almost had the vote. If John McCain had voted up instead of down, the Affordable Care Act would have been done away with, and they could put something else in its place. So that's before us, and that case is there. But also, there's a problem now in Venezuela. And the Trump administration is warning Russia not to meddle. So let's have that story right this moment.
That's right, Pat. That cautionary warning for Russia not to meddle in Venezuela comes after reports that 2 planes brought about 100 Russian troops into the country. Russia backs strongman Nicolás Maduro in the standoff with interim President Juan Guaido. Some Venezuelan soldiers are fleeing the country because they can no longer support Maduro. Chuck Holton brings us their stories from the border town of Cúcuta, Colombia.
High-stakes brinksmanship on the world stage between the United States and Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro's government. After U.S. aid was burned at the border by gangs loyal to Maduro, the Trump administration continued ramping up the pressure on the embattled leader to leave office, something Maduro has steadfastly refused to do. After interim President Juan Guaido's top aide was arrested by Venezuelan intelligence operatives on March 21st, Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, fired off a tweet threatening even more sanctions ahead. Though all of the Venezuelan borders are officially closed, more than 40,000 desperate Venezuelans are escaping into Colombia every day. Most are hoping to find some kind of work in order to send help to the families they left behind. Catherine has been living here on the street with 2 of her children.
I've been here 4 months working as a porter.
She tries to make a living helping others carry their supplies back across the dangerous river crossing into Venezuela. But there's lots of competition.
Sometimes I have to fight the other porters because everyone wants the same car, you know?
The sense of frustration reached a boiling point weeks ago when gangs loyal to Maduro burned aid sent by Colombia and the United States. Catherine, along with many others, are bitter about what happened.
If we go back, it won't be any better. At least here my kids can eat.
Cracks are appearing in the ranks of the armed forces as well. These 2 soldiers threw down their arms February 23rd when they were given orders to fire on their own people. Sergeant Major Darwin Malaguera says morale in his unit was at rock bottom.
February 23rd was the breaking point. When we saw what was happening, we decided we wanted to be on the right side of history, and we made the decision on our own to cross over to the Colombian side.
First Sergeant Omar Carrero was on the bridge that day watching the tragedy unfold.
Many times we had talked about defecting amongst ourselves, but we're very afraid one of our superiors would hear us, because if they did, we'd be thrown in prison automatically. But finally, in small groups, we made the decision to cross. On the very same day, the secret police showed up at my house, looking for my family. Thank God they weren't home.
Eventually, over 1,000 soldiers followed suit, including some officers. But many more are still afraid.
I can say that 98% of the troops in the army would like to see a change of government.
To keep his stranglehold on power, Nicolás Maduro has been arming gangs of criminals who swear allegiance to his regime. Called colectivos, these gangs currently control this border, and everyone who comes across has to pay. For the time being, these Venezuelan soldiers can only wait, hope, and pray the regime will collapse under the weight of its own evil. But they do have a message for America.
Please keep supporting us, putting pressure on in every possible way. I'd like to say with military force, but I know that would result in lots of bloodshed in Venezuela. We don't have a plan. We're simply ready and willing to follow the orders of our president, Juan Guaido, every day.
In Cúcuta, Colombia, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Pat, the question that many are left to ask is how much longer can the standoff last?
Well, I think everybody's wondering the same thing. It's a humanitarian tragedy of great proportion, and the nations don't seem to want to bring military force. But I've said it now and I say it again. This man has got to be taken out at the point of a gun. He's not going to go out peacefully. He's now, there's a possibility that they've got a couple of squads or maybe platoons of Russian troops coming in, which, of course, is a violation of everything we've known about our Western Hemisphere. And the Russians are doing that, and they shouldn't, but that's the report. we also understand that the Cubans are backing up the forces. They're not just Venezuelans. The Venezuelan troops would probably defect, but these Cubans are there, and now Russians. But it's going to take military force. Ladies and gentlemen, I know it sounds difficult, but if you've got a gang of criminals holding hostages in the middle of one of our cities, sooner or later the police have got to go in there with force and take them out. It just has to be. And we need a police department, but we can't just do it by the United States. It'll be a Yankee go home, and we can't have that. But what we do need is the OAS to come together and say, all right, here are the nations of Latin America. We've had all of this Maduro we can stand, and we believe in setting those people in Venezuela free. And I believe that the troops will defect immediately if there's a major force coming in. And Cubans or Russians or not, we can have that accomplished. But the Chinese are trying to oppose it. The Russians are trying to oppose it because it's to their benefit to weaken the United States by having a Venezuelan chaos at our border. John?
Pat, investigators are looking into why the engines on the Viking Sky cruise ship failed while crossing a stormy stretch of Norway's western coast over the weekend. 43-mile-an-hour winds and 26-foot waves rocked the vessel. Passengers posted videos showing the ship violently swaying with chairs and other furniture dangerously rolling from side to side.
Water came bursting through that door, and I have water all over the ground.
We were in our cabin, and everything was sliding everywhere and breaking and crashing, and we could hardly move or walk.
Helicopters launched a dramatic mission to airlift the stranded passengers, bringing 450 people to dry land before the weather calmed, allowing the ship to be towed to port. 17 people were hospitalized. Just dramatic video there, Pat, and fortunately, it didn't get any worse.
Well, they should have probably had some reserve engines that weren't working. Apparently, the engines didn't function. But what a tragedy. It's supposed to be a fun ship cruise, a delightful cruise in the Baltic, and look at something, I mean, wherever they were. I mean, it's incredible.
Wow. Frightening, I'm sure.
Well, that was off the coast of Norway, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I did a Baltic cruise when I had one of those birthdays I've had along the way, and it was just delightful. We took off we sailed from England, then we went up the Kiel Canal, we got into the Baltic, and then we visited various capitals and went all the way down to St. Petersburg. It was a lovely, lovely trip. Whew. But those people, my goodness, what a suffering.